This is apropos. Well, EU leaders have tasked the European Commission to move ahead with proposals to fund Ukraine for the next 2 years, leaving the door open for a mammoth loan funded by frozen Russian assets. The broadly worded summit conclusions, which pushed a formal decision to December, were adopted after marathon talks aimed at addressing the objections of Belgium, where the bulk of the Russian central bank funds are held. With the details, here's Armin Georgian, our Europe editor.
There is no deal on this very thorny issue of the frozen Russian assets here at the EU summit. Tonight, Belgium has held out right to the end, basically. Just to rewind for a second, Sharon. So what Belgium was demanding was firm legal guarantees that if it lost a lawsuit at some point in the future and had to pay a lot of money, unfreezing these assets was going to be challenged in international courts. If that happened, would other EU member states step up? Would they step into the breach and help? So basically, Belgium wanted to share the risk among the EU member states. And what the other EU member states were offering was basically not enough. Here in Brussels today, Belgium still wants clear legal guarantees, and what the EU summit has decided is basically to go back to the European Commission so that the Commission will basically explore a few legal options, give those options back to the member states. The member states will then rediscuss this whole issue at the December EU Council. So in short, they're kicking the can down the road. So essentially, no deal on the frozen assets, which is probably a great disappointment to President Zelensky, who was here at the EU summit as well, and was very much urging the EU to reach a breakthrough on this issue today, but they haven't.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Melinda Haring, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Thanks so much, Melinda, for being with us on the programme. As Armin said there, kicking the can down the road, a huge disappointment this will surely come to President Zelensky, who really made an impassioned plea earlier for more support. How significant is this move, do you think? We won't have any deal until at least December.
Thanks for having me. So this issue, the Russian frozen assets, their status, is probably the most important Ukraine issue right now before all of Europe. The security issue is, of course, very important, but this is a lot of money, and Ukraine needs more money to fund its war machine through the next year or so. So there was an expectation that there would be agreement on this, and we don't see it happening. The Belgians hold a majority of the assets, and they're very, very nervous. They're worried about the liability, and they didn't get the guarantees that they needed today. So the decision is going to be made, in a couple of months.
And Melinda, do you think that the EU can eventually get around these legal issues? Why is all of this proving so challenging?
So the issue is really one of retaliation. Belgium fears, it's a small country, it fears that Russia may go after its businesses in Russia. That's an option. And it could make Belgium's life quite miserable. There also is the precedent as well. So no one wants to stick their neck out first when it comes to Russian assets. There's this idea that these are sovereign assets and they're untouchable.
And how exactly has the EU been using the interest from these assets? Because it amounts to an awful lot of money each year, doesn't it?
It does. And so the consideration today was a $140 billion loan, which didn't move forward. The Ukrainians need additional money to keep the war effort going, and they were hoping to tap into this. It unfortunately didn't happen. They're going to have to look for other sources of funding, unfortunately, for Kiev.
And Belgium, I believe it had been hoping that all member states, if this deal was to have gone ahead, that they would all be obliged to underwrite the debt if the EU eventually moved to borrow that money. But that's a risk for all EU member states as well. There appears to be some reluctance, a lot of reluctance really on that point as well.
That's right. No one wants to stick their neck out first. So we saw that the Germans started to support this, but the majority of assets are held in Belgium. So they really need to be the first mover, and that will compel others to move. So this is sort of a collective action problem. We're waiting for one of the European Union nations to have a little bit of courage, and then everyone will follow.
And there would be a risk, surely, that Kyiv wouldn't be able to eventually repay this money. Would it be seeking damages from Moscow?
Look, the expectation is that this will be forgiven eventually. I don't think anyone presumes that Kiev is going to have to pay this. Remember, Moscow is the aggressor. Moscow went in February of 2022. Kiev did nothing wrong. And Russia was storing its massive treasure in Europe. And this idea that there has to be some kind of justice is very, very, if you poll any Ukrainians, it's the #1 demand in Ukraine, that there has to be justice and accountability for what Russia has done in Ukraine. And that's not just justice in courts, but it's financial justice as well.
And this comes, of course, after we saw sanctions moves by both the US and the EU over the last 24 hours. Why is the EU discussing this now? Is it off the back of those sanctions moves by the US, or is it just a coincidence that this has all come together at more or less the same time?
It's just a coincidence. This package was in preparation. It's the 19th package. There's nothing new or exciting in it. It's good. It's squeezing the Russians even further. But really, the U.S. sanctions package is more surprising. Donald Trump has not favored more sanctions on Russia, so I was more surprised by that. This 19th package of European Union sanctions was expected. And like I said, there's nothing super special about it.
And Vladimir Putin, of course, saying tonight that, these sanctions, they're serious, but they won't actually have any effect, he says, on the Russian economy. Is there truth in that, or is he just posturing?
Look, Vladimir Putin doesn't want more sanctions. He's trying to egg us on a little bit, but yes, they do hurt the war effort. The Russian economy is not in great shape, and the European Union and the United States need to continue to squeeze. Also, the U.S. needs to enforce the existing sanctions that are on the books. Washington is not doing a good job of enforcing those existing sanctions, and it could put a lot more pressure on Moscow if Trump decided he wanted to.
Do you think that he will put more pressure on Moscow, though? Because even last night himself, he was saying that he hoped these sanctions would be short-lived.
Do you want me to grab my crystal ball? Look, Washington is a different place since January 20th of this year. Donald Trump's Ukraine-Russia policy to be charitable is a yo-yo. Some days he's very tough, and some days he says that Ukraine could recapture the territory that it's lost, and then other days he's a toady to Vladimir Putin. It really depends on the moment. I think, though, that Vladimir Putin, his days are numbered, and that Trump knows that he can't trust him. And Trump knows that he put his neck out politically. He tried for the last 6 months to get a peace agreement, and he's got nothing. And so Trump himself has to get something for his base, or he looks very, very weak. And he's sick and tired of being lied to. Remember, Melania Trump keeps telling him, Putin is hitting children, he's hitting schools, he's hitting hospitals. This guy is no good, and you need to be tough. And that matters. We know that Trump is also bothered by the images that he's seeing of targeting of Ukrainian civilians. And Putin himself has switched from hitting civilians to hitting the grid, hitting the infrastructure grid in Ukraine. And he's trying to squeeze Ukrainians. He's trying to make life very, very difficult. This is a tactic that he's pursued for the last 2.5 years in Ukraine. He wants to force Ukrainians to leave the country. And it's winter now. It's starting to get very cold in Ukraine. And he wants to make it impossible for Ukrainians to stay put.
And will Putin, though, do you think, be able to circumvent those sanctions? And just talk to us a little bit about how desperately, at this point, President Zelensky actually needs more cash and more military support from both the EU, but also the US.
So Volodymyr Zelensky needs support from both the United States and Washington. Can he get through the next 6 months? Yes. he will be fine. The financing will come, the military might will come. I don't have any doubt about that. The war is going to continue. So don't get distracted by the headlines. Don't get distracted by Donald Trump's announcement that there might be a Budapest summit. It's not going to happen. We don't see Putin changing his mind whatsoever. And Putin is not offering anything new. There's not going to be some grand breakthrough, in the next couple of weeks or even the next couple of months.
And when we do see EU leaders meeting again in December, do you think there's going to be a breakthrough at that point? There was a lot of talk today before this meeting, a lot of speculation saying that the EU was essentially just there to rubber stamp this agreement.
So there's a lot of pressure on the European Union to do the right thing with these assets. Like I said, justice is the main demand in Ukraine, and this is a deep and abiding demand in Ukraine. It's been the demand as long as I can remember, for more than 20 years, but since the beginning of Ukraine in 91. Ukrainians want real justice, and so I think we're going to see the European Union feel like it has to do something, especially as America becomes a more inconsistent partner. Like I said, we're a yo-yo. Washington goes back and forth. We swing back and forth. And the pressure is on Europe to stand up, to deliver on its commitment, to make sure that Ukraine can withstand this winter. And honestly, it's going to be a very, very hard winter. I don't think we've talked about this enough. The United States is not there. In the past, we were great for the last 3 winters. We provided a lot of technical equipment that kept that grid together. It's a really boring subject, but it's the thing that keeps Ukrainians warm. It keeps children in their schools. It keeps businesses going. The U.S. is missing in action when it comes to winter infrastructure in Ukraine. It's something I'm deeply worried about, and I hope that the European Union, I hope Germany, Britain, and France will make sure that those needs are met so that Ukrainians can stay in place this winter.
Melinda, thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. That's Melinda Haring, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre.